Hello, and welcome to Show Me History. I'm your host, Amy Blankenship. What began as the old commons far from the city's hub, Lafayette Square became a prominent residential area, only to fall into decline for decades and eventually be brought back to life. The neighborhood of Lafayette Square is bounded by Choteau on the north, Highway 44 on the south, east is Doman, and to the west is South Jefferson. The neighborhood was formed from the old commons of the city, located west of the central core of the city at the time. Land was set aside in 1767 for use by all citizens. Homeowners of the early village of St. Louis were given 40 arpent strips of land in the common fields and were granted a common pasture for livestock. By Victorian times, this area had become a hazard place. Still a wooded area, outlaws would set up camp and rob travelers passing through. In 1835, the Missouri legislature passed an act allowing the city to sell the commons for residential purposes. 1/10 of the funds from the land sale would go to public schools. The square would be bounded by streets 120 feet wide. On March 21, 1836, the Board of Aldermen officially ordained the park, creating the center of the Lafayette neighborhood. Land surrounding the square, or park, was surveyed and subdivided into blocks in 1837. It was the fourth city subdivision to be plotted and subdivided for residential use. In 1834, William Page bought the first tract of land and created his country estate. Early settlement of the area was a mix of middle and working class residents who built homes according to their means. But residential construction was slow going. The first lots sold in 1836 and 1837. Then in 1837, there was a financial panic that crippled development pretty much throughout the whole country, and definitely in Lafayette Square for the next 10 years. And parcels of land from this financial crisis were tied up in litigation until 1850. So short on cash, landowners failed to make yearly payments to the city. And an 1850 legal decision restored ownership of all unpaid land back to the city of St. Louis. The only exception to this was Mr. Archibald Campbell. Good for you, sir. In 1850, Charles Gibson, David Nicholson, and Edward Brettle acquired land on Lafayette Avenue. The following year, construction on their Italianate mansions began. The 1850s frontage land near the park was purchased on the south side of Lafayette Avenue and was soon adorned with large mansions. The first person to develop land on the east side was Stephen Barlow, who built a 3-story brick mansion on the southeast corner of Mississippi Avenue and Kennett Place. The sale of land and construction would continue over the next several years. By 1860, only the west side remained undeveloped. Roads and streets were not improved on that side, since the land had been kind of a marshy lake area. In 1863, the state legislature passed a law to preserve the area as an elite neighborhood for influential residents only. Property within 800 feet of Lafayette Square Park could not be, quote, gambling, boarding houses, beer gardens or saloons, slaughterhouses, soap or candle factories, oil, glue, vitriol, chemical, or other manufacturers of any kind, unquote. The law also established real estate tax specifically to collect funds for improvement of the park. Areas closer to the park paid a higher tax. Post-Civil War, demands for housing along Lafayette Square Park were high. Many of the original landowners subdivided their plots and made huge profits. Lafayette Square became the most fashionable residence in St. Louis. Most of the housing was built between 1835 and 1880, consisting of large mansions of varying architectural styles. They took 2 to 4 years to complete. Construction required the coordination of many artisans and craftsmen. Stonemasons had examined the soil and determined the proper foundation type to use. Carpenters had to frame out the buildings and rooms. Bricklayers encased the house, forming inner and outer supports. And once the shell of the house is complete, joiners would begin the elaborate finished carpentry work. Lastly, plasters would come on site and took the task from basic wall plastering to ornate ceiling medallions. And once all the plaster was done, it had to be dried and completely cured for 2 to 3 months before the painters could arrive. Surveyors would come at last to inspect the work and present the final bill to the owner. The Gilded Age of St. Louis was epitomized in Lafayette Square. The park provided a place for leisurely strolls and cricket games. The grand mansions were open for the social season to host balls and banquets. By the late 1890s, very few of the original residents remained in Lafayette Square. Most had moved to Compton Heights in the Central West End to get away from the hustle and noise of the encroaching city. Although still an affluent neighborhood, it was no longer the place to live. The decline of this area really began in 1896. On May 27th of that year, a cyclone swept through the southwest portion of the city, taking out a large number of buildings in Lafayette Square. They say that not a tree was left in the park. Some residents thought it would be too difficult to rebuild and left to live other areas of the city. Actually, majority of the people stayed to rebuild their homes and businesses. The tornado marked a true change in the area that would affect it for years to come. In 1918, St. Louis created a zoning law that made all 4 sides of Lafayette Park permittable for residential use only. In 1923, the Missouri Supreme Court declared this unconstitutional. As a result, there was a rush of businesses established in the area. Among them were a gas station, grocery store, and various confectionaries. After World War II, the neighborhood and park fell into disrepair. Property became under the control of slumlords. Mansions were subdivided and turned into boarding houses. Slumlords would bleed properties for all they were worth and then default on taxes. The city would acquire the property only for it to sit vacant. The city deemed it Slum D in the city plat book, and much of it was slated for demolition. The threat of a north-south distributor highway cutting through the neighborhood spelled disaster. By 1960, Lafayette Square was one of the worst neighborhoods in the city. Let the restoration begin! John Albury Bryan was an early advocate for the restoration of Lafayette Square neighborhood. He moved into 21 Benton Place in 1949 and witnessed firsthand the deconstruction and deterioration of the area. In 1955, he published an article with his argument for preserving the square. Although it would be republished in other media sources, it first appeared in a local trade journal, Construction Record. He argued that destroying neighborhoods causes people to move to the county and as a result causes the city to lose something irreplaceable. City planning should incorporate saving and preserving existing neighborhoods and structures. Parks, streets, and neighborhoods have been neglected by the city. We should preserve what we can and blend new construction with the old. Specifically in Lafayette Square, there existed the need to reduce vacant lots and excessive businesses. Park Avenue should be widened and a cutoff from Mississippi Avenue to Choteau at the 21st Street Viaduct to reduce through traffic in the area. Not bad advice, Mr. Bryan, not bad. The 1960s saw a period of rehabilitation for Lafayette Square. The area was at a critical point. It was not yet declared a historic district, so landowners could do anything. Raise historic buildings, gut them of all their ornate trimmings, plumbing, woodwork, or lovingly restore them to their original grandeur. The fate of the Barlow Mansion proved vital in the rehabilitation of the square. It was demolished to make way for a playground on land owned by a nearby church. This was one of the very first houses ever built in Lafayette Square. 1 week after its demolition, the residents of Lafayette Square organized the Lafayette Square Restoration Committee. Dedicated to preserving and restoring the square's architectural heritage, they were the true pioneers in bringing the square back to life. In June of 1970, the committee organized the first house tours of the square to raise money for further rehab projects. This tradition continues today, and nearly 10,000 people attend the event. In the fall of 1971, the City Planning Commission issued a restoration plan for Lafayette Square neighborhood. At this time, 400 original buildings from the Victorian era remained. Most of the houses had been subdivided into apartments or boarding houses. The conditions of remaining structures were examined and scaled on sound to rehab not feasible. 5.1% were found to be sound with no required improvements. 35.7 needed some rehab. 41 needed major rehab. 14.7 were considered possibly feasible for rehab. And 3.5 were beyond all hope and needed demolition. Those requiring minor rehabilitation only required external repairs to woodwork, chipping paint, tuck pointing, kind of easy little fixes. The major rehabilitation projects included vital elements such as the entire roof, missing masonry, and structural issues. And structures labeled with consideration of rehab feasible had extensive damages to roofs, masonry, and brickwork. Repairs would be at a great cost. The study also looked at the types of buildings in the square at the time. So there's only 88 single-family residences, 67 boarding houses, 331 multi-family residences with a population of 3,255. There was 2,900 feet of empty commercial space. The community facilities consisted of the park, Caroline Mission, German House, many religious facilities, and one public library, but no schools. The traffic patterns at the time were disruptive to the neighborhood. It was considered rather high traffic for a residential area, including extensive truck traffic. There was a lack of a major north-south route in the area. The study outlined some strengths as well. It was less than a mile from the city's central business district and the Mill Creek industrial area containing Boston Purina, Monsanto, Anheuser-Busch, and Falstaff breweries. There are plenty of employment opportunities for potential new residents. It was thought that revitalization of the Lafayette Square neighborhood would spearhead enhancement of surrounding and adjacent neighborhoods. The plan for restoring the area had goals to create a viable residential community and develop a well-balanced community. The city planned to utilize existing structures, residentially develop many vacant properties, and demolish properties that were beyond repair. New construction had to blend in with current constructions and cannot be used to house more than 2 families. Plans included separating commercial spaces from residential, and any industrial development must be compatible with the neighborhood and relocate facilities as needed. Storefront churches should be relocated to more suitable quarters. The 1970s was a time of transition and restoration. Realizing the importance of historic preservation, people began buying and rehabbing houses in the square. Among the first was Ruth Camp Hofner. Widow and mother of 5, she moved into the square in 1970 and began rehabbing her first house. She and her family ended up restoring a total of 8 houses over the years. Ruth played a vital role in the redevelopment of not only houses, but also the park. It was hard and difficult work for those first residents moving to Lafayette Square. First, it was hard to secure a loan from any bank to buy property, no fault to the owner. Lafayette Square had been labeled a blighted area in the city, and banks had flatly refused to permit mortgages for years in blighted areas. Luckily, in June of 1972, the First National Bank of St. Louis changed this. It started giving mortgages to any property buyer who possessed adequate credit. Once the property was purchased, the matter of repairs and rehab was also a chore. Many laborers and tradesmen refused to enter the area due to safety concerns. The early pioneers in restoration had to tackle everything themselves. In 1972, Lafayette Square was declared a historic neighborhood by the city's Board of Aldermen. It was the first neighborhood to receive this honor. Shortly after, it was placed on the National Registry of Historic Places. In 1981, the Lafayette Square Arts Council organized. Their goal is to, quote, use visual and performing arts to connect the diverse social-economic communities of the greater St. Louis region, unquote. They sponsor a variety of events, including band concerts in the park. The City of St. Louis has enacted several pieces of legislation to ensure the preservation of Lafayette Square continues. The Historic District Standards Ordinance, enacted in April of 2012 and updated in February of 2019, are City Ordinances 69112 and 70926. The latter is a 79-page document outlining restoration aspects for all components of structures. So it's facades, roofs, windows, fences, yards, materials used, tuck pointing, doors, interiors, retaining walls, dormers, cornices, ornamentation, gutters, hardware, foundation, carriage houses, security, awnings, patios, mailboxes, garages, porches, etc. It restricts the type of material that can be used and sets strict guidelines on commercial signage, storefronts, and alley houses. It also sets regulations on new construction in the area. In January of 2021, the Lafayette Neighborhood Association created a new strategic plan that aimed to collaborate with several city agencies and city departments, including St. Louis City, City Planning and Design Agency, City's Office of Cultural Affairs, Lafayette Park Implementation Advisory Board, the Parks Department, Lafayette Park Conservancy, Lafayette Square Restoration Committee, and Lafayette Square Business Association. The focus is on community, preservations, balance of vitality and tranquility, and inclusion. Their main goals include to strengthen and improve coordination amongst all those neighborhood organizations, to keep Lafayette areas safe, to encourage historic preservation and improve neighborhood character, bring people together, and support neighborhood livability. Featuring distinct architecture of Second Empire-style houses with mansard roofs and ornamental windows, Italianate and Victorian mansions, the Lafayette Square neighborhood was once one of the most prominent places to live, but fell in great despair and was declared a slum. Through hard work and diligence of truly dedicated individuals, the area has returned to being a vital and vibrant part of the community. The area hosts annual house tours, a holiday market, and continues to focus on improving not only its residences, but the lives of its citizens. Thank you for joining me today. Next time, we will discuss Lafayette Square Park. You can find me on our website at showmehistorystl.com or on Facebook at showmehistorystl. Until next time, I'll see you in the loo.